All right, next up we have Jason Carroll, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Tryptamine Therapeutics. Jason is a highly regarded life sciences executive with over 30 years global experience within the pharmaceutical industry, and his extensive background includes leadership roles at industry giants Johnson & Johnson, Janssen Pharmaceutica, and Inova Pharmaceuticals as well. So please welcome Jason Carroll up to the stage with the story.
Good afternoon. I've had most of my career in what most people call evil big pharma, and some people have a good reason to do that. But what psychedelics market knows, and for those people who understand psychedelics a little bit, is this market is completely immature. It's been operating in and out for 50 years for various reasons, and it's very, very difficult for people without a pharmaceutical background to bring essentially a generic natural product into a place where it can actually be used effectively through patients, especially in conditions of mental health. To give you an idea of what Tryptamine Therapeutics is, market cap's around about $50 million. Our founder is Dr. William Garner, holds about 14%. I'm on that list as top 5 as well, as is Dr. Daniel Tillett, CEO of Race. I think Peter might be doing a presentation on Race later today. And our chair is Mr. Herwig Janssen. And for those that don't know who Herwig Janssen is, he's the son of the founder of Janssen Pharmaceutica, which is the pharmaceutical arm of Johnson & Johnson, responsible for about $70 billion of their revenue in the last 12 months. Top 100, 81%. So the company is quite tightly held, even though there are a lot of shares on issue because we backed into another ASX company recently. There's a reason why people should be excited about this category, and it's difficult sometimes to get that message across because I've been 3 decades in pharma, so I know a good product. Spent 4 years in licensing and acquisition across the globe, mostly in Asia Pacific, working with Herwig and others. Thing about psilocybin, most people would know what that is. It comes from what they call magic mushrooms. Some people would understand what that is. You start sometimes to get a laugh out of it when people start talking about it. I notice there's no laughing anymore. Now, people understand that these products are going to get somewhere. The fact is most people don't know exactly where that's going to be. But the active ingredient inside psilocybin is a product called psilocin. Psilocin is the product that does all the work. If you have natural psilocybin, it goes through your liver, gets converted to psilocin, travels up to the brain, and does the work. The reason why it so effectively gets into the brain is because the body makes something called serotonin. Serotonin is responsible for modulating everything, your mood, your feeling, your happiness, your emotions. Now, you see there the chemical structure of psilocin is very, very similar to the body's own serotonin. So the receptors take that thing up really, really effectively. And that does a number of things. Now, this is a really important chart, even though there's a lot of things on here, which is fair. But for those people that either have or know someone that's ever had fibromyalgia, it is a chronic condition. 4% of the global population is affected by fibromyalgia. IBS, most people would they know someone, 8% of the world, someone has IBS symptoms, irritable bowel syndrome. And the third is binge eating disorder. 2% of the world and Australian people have binge eating disorder. Now, these are 3 studies that Tryptamine has already done in the US, so 3 separate INDs. A market cap company of 50 million doesn't usually do studies in the US. But 3 phase 2 studies were done with psilocybin. So we didn't use psilocin, we used psilocybin. As I said, natural, not patentable. You can't get a patent around a natural product. So there's no protection for people when they use oral psilocybin, as far as a pharma company is concerned. But the results from that, knowing the active ingredient that goes here is the same. The benefit of that is binge eating disorder, 80% reduction. Now it works. 80% reduction in binge eating disorder episodes. And for people that understand binge eating disorder, it's a very significant neurological condition where you cannot stop and you eat and you eat and you eat and you eat. 80% reduction with one dose. One dose. Anxiety and depression reduced by 50% over a 14-week period of the study. 14 weeks, one dose. And that's as far as the study went. Fibromyalgia, you'll see the numbers there. There's improvement across the board, not only in pain, but in all the symptoms that go along with fibromyalgia. And IBS, 83% of patients responded. And in fact, a couple of patients in that study no longer have anything classified as IBS. And that was done at Harvard University. The first time Harvard has done any work on a psychedelic medication. Potential of these is massive. But the problem the pharmaceutical company has had for such a long time is, how do you make money out of these things? And psilocybin was first synthesized in a lab in the 1920s. It's been around for 100 years. It's been known in nature for thousands of years. So what do you need to do? First of all, you need to make it better. Psilocybin is a very difficult product to treat patients with. There are companies that made their whole business, $500 million company, Compass Pathways in the US, oral psilocybin. The problem is it takes a long time to go through treatment, 8 to 10 hours. 2 therapists in a room at the same time, so the labour cost is high. Slow onset of action, 1 to 2 hours. Can't target patient blood levels, and I'll show you in a slide later. There is a difference between every patient that takes oral psilocybin. You can't reverse it, take a tablet, capsule, you can't reverse that. You have to be there. Everyone needs to be there. And there's really no IP around a capsule of naturally occurring or synthesized psilocybin. And is that commercially scalable as a model? Can you actually have patients coming through when that psychiatrist and potentially a therapist have to be in that room with that patient all day and they can't see other patients? There's $15,000 of labour alone per day per patient, and then 5 to 10 patients that don't see a therapist or a psychiatrist in that day that patient's being treated. So the better way is important. Now this chart is very, very busy, granted. This is actually 30 or 40 people, volunteers that took 1 capsule of psilocybin. If you look at that chart, you'll see a very massively variable amount of psilocin that's drawn up into the blood with that capsule. Everyone's liver metabolizes differently. Every patient is different. 30% of the time, patients do not get the right dose. They get underdosed. They don't get the right therapy. And you can't just double the dosing here, because when you do that, you increase side effects significantly. And you don't know which patient is going to have a certain response. So not only is the patient sometimes apprehensive about psychedelics, but the therapist and the psychiatrist are also apprehensive, because they don't know when the product's going to start working, whether it starts working, and what the patient will go through. And that's the main reason why a lot of psychiatrists, they fear giving this sort of product to patients, because they don't know what they're going to get. This is actually a phase 1 study we did at CMAX in Adelaide with human volunteers. We actually used IV-infused psilocin for the first time in the world. 14 patients altogether. You can see the blue lines and the orange lines. This is a 2-hour infusion. All patients reached an appropriate, as they would call it, psychedelic state within the first 15 minutes, and then maintain that state across for 2 hours. We did a group of patients who were obese, and the blood levels were essentially in parallel. What that means is there'll be no dose changes, no dose escalation required between different weights or sexes of people. It'll be the same dose, and established a lot of safety on this product as well. In terms of large pharma, and I know because I've worked in that area for a long time, and AbbVie is a company that follows quite strictly along J&J's guidelines as well when it comes to what they take over. They take over assets, small companies, they take it into their machine, they globalize it, they do the studies, they get the product done. And they acquired 1 asset called bretisilocin for $1.2 billion couple of months ago. And that signals the first time a large multinational pharma company has decided they're going to take an interest in psychedelic medicine. That's a big step for this category because that signals when a top 10 company decides they want to get in, that's a good signal. And we have a 38 million US market cap. We have a 2-hour infusion. Psilocin has one study, 40 patients in major depressive disorder, and they got taken over for 1.2 billion very recently. We have our first patient enrolled in binge eating disorder at Swinburne, and we have a 12-patient study that's going to go forward from here. It's really very exciting to see the first time what a patient will go through with IV psilocin. The first time anywhere in the world this has happened. Now, how do we think that 8803, which is IV-infused psilocin for Tryptamine Therapeutics, and what they call entropy, will transform neuropsychiatry? The brain sends a lot of signals, electrical signals, and the amount of connections you have and the amount of signals that go on is called entropy. People with depression, PTSD often have very low entropy. They're very fixed in their ways, very fixed in their responses. You have to elevate that entropy because psilocin's such a strong neuromodulator. It allows the brain to reset and break some of those loops that have been troubling people for such a long time. So 2 hours, we are doing the study at Swinburne. We're looking at 2-hour infusion. We're looking at a 1-hour infusion as well to see whether we can get a similar result between 2 and 1. And these are all patients with binge eating disorder. So I talked a bit about IBS, fibromyalgia and binge eating disorder before. And most people when they think about psychedelics would say, well, everyone talks about depression, anxiety, they talk about post-traumatic stress. Why do you guys talk about fringe indications? And that's interesting because these indications weren't even considered to be in the mental health space until Tryp Therapeutics, a parent in Canada now, Tryptamine Therapeutics in Australia, did the studies to show that this drug is effective in IBS, is effective in fibromyalgia, and is effective in binge eating disorder. So we're the first, we have the IP around that, and we have patents pending in that area, not just for the drug, but for the condition. So you'll have at the moment, many companies are focused in the green, yellow, and red areas. We're focused in the blue area. This is global pharmaceutical business. So you look at the parts that we have alone. We have IP around those conditions for the next 18 years, theoretically. And we know we can go into depression, anxiety, and PTSD at any time because it's clear knowledge that the products will work there. We have a better delivery mechanism that has IP around it, infusion of psilocin, which we own as a patent. It makes you wonder why people don't respond to that and think that might be something that's good. And you imagine that most people that have depression, they have anxiety, they're on some sort of medication, usually daily medication, antidepressants or something similar. We know that about half of them don't get the right result, outcome from those treatments, but they have something. For IBS, fibromyalgia, and binge eating disorder, these patients really have very little that will actually make them better. The thing about those three conditions is the patients also suffer from depression, anxiety, and some of them have PTSD from trauma. So that ability for us to take that whole market, that we are the only player in that blue section versus every pharmaceutical player and every psychedelics player in the other three colours. It's a good story. Part of my time at J&J was about 20 years across 4 different countries, US, Vietnam, Philippines, Australia, and about a year in China. We did a lot of work with a product called Remicade. It peaked at about 10 billion US per year. That was an infusion. and that was an infusion for gastroenterologists to give to patients with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. Also went to dermatologists in psoriatic arthritis and psoriasis, and also went to rheumatologists for rheumatoid arthritis. Increasing the number of chairs in these offices increased the number of sales of the product. And getting a chair, an infusion chair, into a gastroenterological unit is not an easy sell, because gastros by nature don't want to treat the patient, they want to treat the organ. Psychiatrists want to treat the patient. So getting an opportunity to get things in there and help people to understand how they get better, psychiatrists is going to be much more willing to want to do that. It's a very, very profitable model for a physician as well. When patients will be in a psychedelic state within 15 minutes. I've been to 5 of the Australian infusions out of the 14 that we did. I saw them from behind a window, of course, but very, very quiet, very, very inward. No one needed any support. So you think about how many patients a doctor may be able to see in a given day. It's scalable, it's commercial. It's actually from Vietnam. There was one hospital there, and I took the photo, but they had this beautiful hospital, oncology hospital. It was complete. It was gorgeous. It was brand new. Went into this one room, it was empty. I said, why is the room empty? Oh, we can't afford to buy the chairs. And I said, well, okay, tomorrow you'll have 50 chairs delivered to your hospital. Will you use them? I went back the next day after the chairs arrived. They were full. They were rotating 3 groups of patients through every day from those 50 chairs. It's amazing that people don't always think beyond, but this is a way to get business. Obviously, it won't look the same as those last ones. We're looking at a number of potential models of programs we can use to make this more modern, but it's a very, very exciting opportunity to consider that in 1 to 2 hours, and maybe 1 to 3 times a year, your patients can be free of some of these diseases that have haunted them for such a long time. There are 6 patent families that we have so far. And there are 3 things actually that Herwig Janssen taught me. It's like you need to have a great product. You need to have tremendous intellectual property protection if a large pharma company wants to purchase you. And you need to have amazing data, because no one wants to buy a company that doesn't have amazing data. So we have this one. We are working on getting amazing data, and we expect to have some of that coming through by the end of this year. And I can actually say that by this time next year, there'll be at least 60 to 80 patients that will have been infused by 8803 by that time in multiple indications this time next year. We tried to make sure that we met every milestone we put in front of people, and we have done so to date. We have a number of things that are coming up that are very exciting for us. In particular, is final data in IBS at Harvard. They have 2 patients to go of the 14 they're putting into that study, and they'll have them by the end of the year. We have the binge eating data that will be coming through in the next few months. And we have a new study that we'll talk about to the market during the coming quarter, which will have the opportunity to transform neuropsychiatry, not just here, but globally, is in my opinion. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you for that very informative presentation. Have we got any questions for Jason? Yes, up the back, the gentleman there.
Hi, Jason, another great presentation.
Thanks.
Just a question, and it just occurred to me, when the patient is in that sort of zone, is there interaction with the therapist, or is it just being in that state for a period of time that unwires everything?
Yeah, the interesting thing about this particular drug is it takes people on a very inward experience. It's not outwardly noticeable. And in fact, talk and conversation between therapists and patients is virtually non-existent during the period of 15 minutes through to 2 hours. The patients are still coherent, they can still talk if they get talked to, but they don't initiate conversation. At least that's the experience that I had when I was watching them. They were very, very quiet and very comfortable. And at the end of the 2 hours, they got up and they were walking around. So it's, no, very little therapy. The therapy is there for support, but certainly there's no interactive therapy that goes on during the session itself.
Right, fascinating. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Other questions? I had a question, actually. What's the sort of cost involved in the therapy? What are we talking about in terms of the actual dollar cost?
If you're talking about cost, total cost,
Yeah.
drug and therapy itself, it depends on the length of the infusion, depends on the length of the treatment. As I said, current therapy, it's in the region of $20,000 to $30,000 in terms of oral psilocybin at the moment. That's at least the costs that have coming through. We would see this being significantly lower than that, and obviously a lower labour component being needed as well. But we haven't looked at pricing at this stage. But we would certainly think that would be a very, very high cost to come in at if we were coming in at the current cost of therapy. Thanks, everyone.